The cafe was on a quiet street corner, the kind of place where people came not just for the coffee but for the warmth of being around others. Outside, a few tables were set up under a faded green awning, and the small sign above the door swung gently with the breeze. The smell of fresh pastries drifted through the air, mixing with the faint aroma of roasted coffee beans. Every morning, the place filled slowly, with a few regulars walking in first, nodding to the barista behind the counter. Inside, the cafe was bright but cozy, with wooden tables and chairs, soft cushions on the benches, and walls decorated with old photographs and small paintings. The chatter of patrons mixed with the clinking of cups and the occasional hiss of the espresso machine. It was the kind of sound that made people feel comfortable, like they had stepped into a place where time slowed down just enough to let them breathe. The morning crowd was lively, a mix of students, office workers, and neighbors who liked to take their time with breakfast. Some were busy with their laptops, typing quickly, while others read newspapers or quietly sipped their drinks. Laughter came from one corner where a group of friends shared stories over warm mugs and chocolate treats. A few people nibbled on Snickers and pastries, smudging powdered sugar on their fingers as they talked and laughed. The barista moved smoothly behind the counter, taking orders and preparing drinks with practiced hands. He knew most of the customers by name, greeting each one with a smile and a small joke. The regulars appreciated the personal touch, and it made the cafe feel like a second home to them. In one corner, a small child tried to reach the counter, giggling when the barista handed over a tiny cookie. In the middle of all this warmth and energy, there was an undercurrent of rhythm. Cups were set down, spoons stirred coffee, chairs scraped lightly against the floor. People were happy, but it was a comfortable happiness, the kind that comes from familiar surroundings and good company. Conversation flowed easily, with stories shared, advice given, and jokes repeated. There was nothing extraordinary happening, yet everything felt just right. As the morning went on, more people came in, drawn by the smell of freshly baked bread and the promise of a quiet, friendly space. A young couple found a small table near the window, sharing a pastry and smiling as they talked about plans for the day. An older man sat alone, slowly enjoying his coffee and reading a book, occasionally glancing out the window at the street outside. A group of students huddled together with notebooks and pens, discussing a project, their voices rising and falling with excitement and concern. The cafe had a gentle hum of life, a mixture of noise and comfort that wrapped around everyone like a blanket. It was the kind of place where people could come to be alone yet surrounded by others, where laughter and silence existed side by side. The sound of Snickers being unwrapped, the soft crunch of bites, and the occasional spill of sugar on the table all added to the texture of the day. Everything was ordinary, yet each moment felt warm and alive. At one table, a small group of friends shared stories and memories, passing around chocolate bars and laughing at old jokes. Their voices carried, mixing with the background noise, adding to the sense of community that filled the room. Across the cafe, a young woman carefully sipped her cappuccino, eyes focused on the notebook in front of her. She doodled absent-mindedly, glancing occasionally at the other patrons, taking in the scene with a quiet appreciation. The barista moved from table to table, filling cups, wiping counters, and chatting briefly with those who wanted a moment of conversation. He knew when to step back and let people enjoy their space, and when to offer a friendly word or smile. His presence added to the rhythm of the cafe, a steady heartbeat in the midst of morning activity. Outside, the street was beginning to fill with people walking to work, students heading to school, and neighbors running errands. Some paused to look through the cafe window, attracted by the warm light and the sight of people enjoying their time. A few older residents waved to those they recognized inside, exchanging small gestures that connected the inside of the cafe with the world outside. The atmosphere was easy, unhurried, and inviting. People felt comfortable speaking, laughing, or simply sitting quietly, letting the sounds and smells of the cafe surround them. Every table had its own little story, each person immersed in their own world, yet connected by the shared space. The cafe was alive, not in a loud or chaotic way, but with a steady, gentle pulse that made it feel like a place where anything could happen. It was in this environment that a young woman entered, carrying a small, unassuming case. She looked around quietly, scanning the room with a calm, steady gaze. The chatter continued around her, but a few heads turned briefly, curious about the newcomer. There was nothing striking about her appearance, yet she moved with a quiet confidence that seemed to make the air slightly different. People went back to their conversations, but a subtle tension of anticipation lingered. She walked to a piano tucked in the corner, slightly worn but well cared for, with polished keys and a soft wooden frame. As she placed her case down and opened it carefully, a hush seemed to sweep over a small section of the cafe. Some patrons leaned forward, curiosity getting the better of them. The cafe had been full of life and noise a moment ago, yet now there was a shift, a gentle pause that seemed to invite attention without demanding it. The young woman adjusted her position on the bench, fingers hovering over the keys. The cafe continued its gentle hum, but those near the piano watched quietly, sensing something different about what was about to happen. The smell of coffee and pastries lingered, the chatter softened, and for a moment, it felt as though the cafe itself was holding its breath. The ordinary morning had begun to feel like it might change, and no one knew exactly why. People continued to glance toward the piano, some whispering softly to each other. The child near the counter stopped mid-giggle, curious eyes fixed on the newcomer. The barista paused, hand resting on a cup, watching with a slight smile. The atmosphere shifted imperceptibly, not in fear or tension, but in expectation, a sense that something small and magical was about to enter the everyday rhythm of the cafe. In that moment, the cafe was a blend of the familiar and the unknown. The smells, the sounds, the laughter, and the movement all continued. Yet there was a new layer, an undercurrent of anticipation that threaded through the room. Patrons adjusted their chairs slightly, leaning forward without realizing it, drawn by something they could not yet hear. The ordinary morning had become a stage for something unexpected, and everyone in the cafe, whether they noticed it consciously or not, was ready to experience it. The young woman settled onto the bench in front of the piano, setting her small case carefully on the floor beside her. Her movements were calm and deliberate, as though she had done this many times before. She glanced around the cafe briefly, her eyes meeting those of a few curious patrons, and offered a quiet, polite nod. There was no rush, no sign of nervousness, only a steady presence that seemed to draw attention without demanding it. Some of the regulars leaned in slightly, their curiosity piqued. They whispered softly to each other, speculating about who she might be and what she would play. A few students paused their study, pencils hovering over notebooks, captivated by the quiet aura she brought with her. Even the child near the counter, who had been happily munching a cookie, turned to watch, eyes wide with wonder. The barista, moving with practiced efficiency, glanced over his shoulder at the newcomer. He raised an eyebrow in silent approval, recognizing the calm confidence she carried. He returned to his work, but a subtle smile lingered on his face, knowing that something different was about to unfold in his usually busy cafe. The woman opened her case fully, revealing the small, worn piano inside. She adjusted the stool slightly, ensuring she could reach the keys comfortably. Her fingers hovered above the ivory for a moment, and a hush seemed to spread across the cafe. Patrons shifted in their seats, almost instinctively, as if they were sensing the importance of this moment. Conversations died down, the clinking of cups became softer, and the hum of everyday life quieted just enough to make space for something new. She took a deep breath and placed her hands lightly on the keys. It was not a dramatic gesture, just a simple, natural way of connecting with the instrument. Her eyes closed for a second, and the cafe felt suspended, as though the walls themselves were waiting. The smell of coffee, the warmth of sunlight through the windows, and the soft rustle of pages turning all blended into a serene backdrop. Everyone in the room felt it, the ordinary world pausing for a brief, delicate moment. A man at the corner table whispered to his friend, questioning what kind of music she might play. A few others exchanged quiet glances, smiles tugging at their lips as anticipation built. The child near the counter leaned forward, resting chubby hands on the edge of the table, fascinated by the mystery before them. Each person in the cafe was holding their breath in their own way, curious and ready for the unexpected. Her fingers pressed down on the keys, testing the sound with a soft, gentle note. It was subtle at first, barely breaking the stillness, but it was enough to make the cafe lean in. People paused mid-sip, mid-laugh, mid-conversation, noticing the sound as it rolled softly across the room. The single note was clear and pure, yet it carried a quiet strength that made it impossible to ignore. The woman adjusted her hands slightly, moving from one key to another, creating a short melody. It was simple and delicate, almost like a whisper that invited everyone to listen. The cafe, once filled with chatter and laughter, fell into a deeper silence. Conversations stopped, pens were paused mid-word, and even the barista, moving to serve a cup of coffee, seemed frozen in place for a moment, listening intently. Patrons who had been absorbed in their own worlds suddenly became part of something shared. The music created a thread connecting everyone in the cafe, an invisible bond of attention and curiosity. The child's eyes sparkled, unblinking, as the soft melody carried across the room. The older man reading his book lowered it slightly, a small smile forming on his lips. The couple by the window leaned closer to each other, their conversation replaced by quiet appreciation. The woman's fingers moved with confidence and grace. She did not rush. Each note was deliberate, carrying emotion and depth. Her eyes occasionally opened, scanning the room briefly, as if aware of the silent audience. The piano, though small and unassuming, produced music that felt far larger than the instrument itself. It filled the space gently, threading its way around every table, every chair, every quiet corner of the cafe. Some patrons felt memories stir within them, emotions they had tucked away. A soft note reminded someone of a childhood moment, a laugh, a song long forgotten. Another felt a pang of longing, remembering a friend or family member far away. The music was subtle, not dramatic, yet it spoke directly to the heart of everyone who listened. It did not demand attention, but it commanded it naturally. The cafe became a room suspended in time. The usual noises faded completely. There was no clinking of spoons or scraping of chairs, only the music weaving through the air. People who had just moments ago been talking or typing or reading now sat completely still, mesmerized by the presence of the young woman and the gentle magic she created through the piano. The barista, noticing the shift, stopped mid-task, leaning slightly on the counter as he watched. He had seen musicians play in the cafe before, but there was something about her calm presence and the way she handled the piano that made this different. He could feel the collective attention of the room, the subtle transformation from ordinary mourning to shared experience. Whispers of admiration began, but only among those closest to the piano. A woman sitting near the front table whispered to her friend about how beautiful the sound was, careful not to disturb the quiet spell that had settled. Another patron, a young man with a notebook open, simply set down his pen, letting the melody carry him away from his thoughts. Even the child near the counter remained still, fascinated, as if understanding that something special was happening. The young woman played with intention, creating patterns that were simple yet moving. She shifted from soft, delicate notes to slightly stronger chords, each one resonating through the small room. The music did not rush or overwhelm. It invited everyone to lean in, to feel rather than just hear. Her expression remained calm, focused, and serene, adding to the sense that the moment was not about performance, but about connection. As the melody continued, patrons began to notice the effect it had on each other. The young couple held hands gently, their conversation replaced by a shared sense of wonder. Friends at another table exchanged smiles, enjoying the subtle beauty together. Even those who came to the cafe alone felt less alone, connected to the room, to the music, and to the shared human experience around them. The cafe was transformed from a simple morning gathering to a place of quiet reflection and attention. The ordinary noises of daily life were replaced by something extraordinary in its simplicity. Every note seemed to carry a little piece of the woman's presence, a quiet power that made the room feel suspended, balanced between reality and a gentle dream. People's hearts seemed to settle, worries and concerns momentarily paused. The barista, moving back to finish a coffee, did so with a lighter step, smiling subtly as he noticed the calm that had spread. The child, still wide-eyed, clutched a small cookie, mesmerized by the sound and the sense of magic in the room. Everyone, in their own way, became part of the music, the cafe, and the unfolding moment. Time felt different in those minutes. What had been a lively morning with chatter and laughter was now a shared experience, quiet yet full of life. Patrons understood that this was not just music but a gentle reminder of the beauty that could exist in ordinary places. The young woman continued to play, each note careful and deliberate, carrying the attention of everyone in the cafe with her. In this way, the cafe, already filled with warmth and life, became a place of subtle wonder. Patrons who had come for coffee, breakfast, or a brief moment of respite found themselves part of something unexpectedly beautiful. The young woman at the piano, quiet and focused, had created a space where ordinary life intersected with something memorable, simple, and human. The story of this morning was just beginning, yet the first chapters were already unforgettable. She pressed down on the keys, and the first note rang out clearly, filling the room with a pure, gentle sound. It was a single note, but it carried weight, almost like it was speaking to each person in the cafe individually. The chatter that had quietly filled the background stopped immediately. Conversations died in mid-word, spoons paused mid-stir, and even the air seemed to hold its breath. The note lingered, soft but undeniable, drawing every eye to the piano in the corner. People shifted slightly in their seats, instinctively leaning forward as if to catch every vibration of the sound. The child at the counter stopped munching the cookie, wide eyes fixed on the woman, watching her hands glide over the keys. The couple near the window leaned closer to each other, their whispered words fading into silence. Everyone in the cafe, whether they realized it or not, had turned their attention completely to the melody that had begun so simply but carried with it an invisible force. The young woman did not rush. She let the note breathe, allowing its resonance to fill the space. Then she moved to the next note, another soft, deliberate sound, and the room seemed to lean in again. Each note was measured, precise, yet full of emotion. It was as if the music was weaving its way through the hearts of the listeners, touching memories and feelings they had tucked away. A man at a corner table glanced at his coffee, realizing he had forgotten to take a sip. He smiled faintly, noticing the way the music made him pause and reflect. Across the room, a woman running a small notebook through her hands set it down, captivated entirely. Even the barista, busy serving orders moments before, stood still for a heartbeat, hands resting on the counter as he listened. The cafe, full of its usual morning life, had transformed into a place of shared attention and quiet wonder. Her hands moved with grace, each note deliberate, flowing into the next as though telling a story without words. The first melody was soft, delicate, but it carried an emotional weight that made people hold their breath. Patrons who had come in with their own thoughts, worries, or daily routines found themselves transported, even briefly, into a moment they could all share. The cafe was no longer just a cafe. It had become a sanctuary for a simple, human connection, created entirely through music. The child near the counter leaned on the table, watching in awe as the fingers danced across the keys. Every so often, a soft gasp escaped the lips of someone who had been drawn in, unable to contain their admiration for the delicate precision. No one spoke. The room was full of people yet utterly silent, all captivated by a young woman whose presence had seemed so ordinary just moments before. She shifted slightly in her seat and played a series of notes that rose gently, almost like a question being asked softly into the room. The effect was subtle but immediate. A wave of calm spread through the cafe, settling on each patron. People's postures softened, their expressions relaxed, and even the gentle hum of life seemed to slow. The music did not shout or demand attention. It invited it, gently coaxing everyone into a moment of shared experience. The barista caught a glimpse of a few patrons who had been typing on laptops moments ago, now simply resting their hands on the table, eyes closed, listening. Even the couple by the window, normally engaged in quiet conversation, were holding hands and leaning slightly toward each other, fully absorbed. The young woman continued, each note carefully chosen, each pause intentional, creating a rhythm that felt natural yet mesmerizing. Every now and then, her eyes opened, scanning the room. She did not glance at anyone for long, only long enough to acknowledge their presence, and then her gaze returned to the keys. Her expression remained calm, almost serene, as if she were speaking through the music instead of words. The cafe had become a space of quiet emotion, each listener reacting in their own way, yet all connected by the same shared experience. The music began to swell slightly, not in volume but in depth and richness. Notes intertwined, creating a delicate tapestry of sound that filled every corner of the cafe. Patrons were held in rapt attention, noticing subtleties in the way the music moved them. The young man with the notebook scribbled a few lines, inspired not to write, but to capture the feeling that washed over him. The older man reading his book lowered it completely immersed in the experience rather than the words on the page. Even small sounds of life in the cafe became part of the music. The occasional clink of a cup, the soft scrape of a chair, the rustle of a newspaper. These became subtle accompaniments, unnoticed before, now harmonizing with the piano. The young woman did not play loudly or show off skill. Every note was simple, deliberate, and meaningful. The transformation was in the attention, in the collective stillness, and in the way the music connected everyone present. Some patrons felt old memories surface. A single note reminded someone of a song their parent had played long ago. A chord struck an echo of a forgotten laugh or a long-ago celebration. Emotions arose gently, like shadows of past moments, comforting and bittersweet. No one spoke, but a few let their eyes glisten with quiet feeling. The music did not tell them what to feel, but it opened a door for reflection, and each person stepped through in their own way. The young woman played a melody that seemed to rise and fall with the subtle motion of life itself. It was not fast, nor dramatic, but a natural flow, gentle yet profound. Patrons became more than observers. They were participants in the silent dialogue the music created. Even the child moved slightly, swaying a little to the rhythm, sensing the emotion in ways that words could not capture. The room was alive with a kind of magic that was invisible yet felt by everyone. The barista, moving back to finish a coffee, noticed the subtle smiles and quiet glances exchanged across tables. He recognized the rare effect of a musician who could captivate without shouting, without urgency, simply by letting the music breathe. He felt it himself. A sense of calm, a gentle lifting of the ordinary, replaced by a small, shared miracle. Patrons who had been strangers a moment before now felt connected through the simple act of listening. The melody softened, each note lingering slightly longer than the last. The young woman's hands moved delicately, like she was placing a gentle touch on each listener's heart. The cafe was hushed, yet it was not still. It was alive with emotion. People's attention was unified without effort. Every subtle expression, every shifting posture, every soft sigh contributed to the shared presence of the moment. The child finally let out a quiet giggle, realizing the music could be both mesmerizing and playful. A few others smiled in response, the first soft stirrings of sound since the music began. Even the couple by the window exchanged a quiet look, acknowledging the effect the notes had on them. The room, though still overwhelmingly quiet, began to feel a little more relaxed, a little more human in the gentle ways people expressed appreciation. She continued to play, alternating between delicate passages and fuller chords. The piano, small and unassuming, seemed to expand with each note, filling the cafe with a richness that made people forget the outside world for a while. Conversations had stopped entirely, replaced by the music and the quiet attention it commanded. Patrons were caught in a moment of pure presence, noticing things they usually overlooked: the warmth of sunlight, the aroma of fresh coffee, the simple act of being with others. As she played, there was no sense of performance or showing off. The young woman seemed to exist entirely in the music, each note a natural extension of herself. Her expression remained calm, focused, and serene. The patrons, fully immersed, felt that they were witnessing something extraordinary yet entirely human. A quiet magic that did not demand, but invited and included everyone in the room. By the time she reached a particularly soft chord, the entire cafe was captivated, the sound lingering in the air and resonating in the hearts of those present. It was not just a melody, but a shared experience that left no one untouched. Even the people who had been lost in thought, checking their phones or reading, had been drawn into the moment, held by the power of something simple, beautiful, and unspoken. The first note had begun the transformation, and the room was now united in quiet awe. Patrons felt lighter, calmer, and more present. The young woman, sitting at the piano, continued with gentle confidence, aware of the effect her music had, but not seeking to control it. She played for the room, for the people, and for the ordinary morning that had suddenly become extraordinary. The cafe, once full of chatter and laughter, had transformed into a quiet sanctuary, each person caught in the spell of the young woman at the piano. Her hands moved effortlessly, creating a melody that was both delicate and deep. It was not just music. It was a story, told in sounds that reached directly to the hearts of everyone present. People listened with rapt attention, noticing details in the notes that seemed to echo their own feelings. The child near the counter pressed tiny fingers to the edge of the table, mesmerized, as if the music had painted colors in the air. The young couple by the window leaned together, holding hands, sharing a silent understanding that they were part of a moment far bigger than themselves. Across the room, a man paused mid-bite of a pastry, eyes closed, letting the melody wash over him. Even the barista, usually focused on his work, had stopped entirely, listening with a quiet smile. Each note seemed to tell a story without words, and the cafe responded in kind. Conversations had ceased completely, replaced by a collective breathless attention. Patrons no longer thought about their routines, their worries, or their daily schedules. Instead, they were present, connected by a shared human experience, caught in the magic of the music that seemed to belong to all of them. The young woman played with subtlety, shifting between soft, gentle passages and slightly fuller chords. She never forced the music, never played loudly or aggressively, but allowed it to flow naturally. The result was a quiet but profound impact. People felt emotions rise within them. Some felt joy, some nostalgia, and some a simple sense of peace that had eluded them for days. The music was not manipulative. It invited reflection, emotion, and connection. The child let out a soft laugh, delighted by a playful note, and the sound reminded the adults of the innocence and simplicity of childhood. The young couple exchanged glances, smiling, knowing that they were experiencing something rare and beautiful together. A woman near the back, who had been fidgeting with her phone, set it aside, realizing that the music was far more important than anything on the screen. Even the man reading his book had closed it, captivated by the living melody around him. The cafe, a small room with familiar smells and sights, had become larger in a sense. The music expanded its walls, reaching to every corner, touching everyone equally. Patrons felt lighter, more aware of the beauty in ordinary things. The warmth of sunlight on the table, the aroma of fresh coffee, the gentle sound of distant footsteps outside. Each note was like a thread weaving everyone together, forming a tapestry of shared emotion. The young woman's expression remained calm and serene. She did not glance at her audience often, but occasionally her eyes lifted to notice them, acknowledging their presence. It was not a performance meant to impress, but a gift she shared silently. She played for herself and for the room, letting the music speak in place of words. Patrons responded naturally, drawn into a space that existed outside time, a space that belonged to the moment itself. A soft chord resonated, and someone in the back of the cafe quietly gasped, not out of shock, but from the depth of feeling it stirred. The child clapped softly, delighted by the playfulness of the notes. The couple leaned closer together, feeling a warmth not only from the music, but from being near each other in such a shared, quiet experience. Even the barista, wiping down the counter, felt a sense of calm that made the morning shift feel lighter and easier. Every note seemed carefully considered, each pause intentional. Patrons noticed the spaces between the sounds as much as the sounds themselves. These silences were not empty. They were full of anticipation, of reflection, of the beauty of listening. The cafe itself felt alive, responding to the music as if it could feel the joy, the calm, and the wonder that filled the room. Even small sounds, the gentle clink of a cup, the soft rustle of a napkin, seemed to harmonize with the piano, unnoticed before but now part of the shared experience. The young woman shifted slightly in her seat, moving into a slightly more complex passage. The melody grew richer, carrying subtle emotions that reached each listener in a personal way. Someone remembered a distant friend. Another remembered a place they had long left behind. The music allowed them to feel these memories without overwhelming them, simply holding them gently, like a soft hand on the shoulder. The cafe was still, yet it was alive with subtle movement. Eyes followed her hands, heads turned slightly toward the sound, and even the child's little feet tapped softly to the rhythm. Patrons who had been quiet, reserved, or even distracted moments before were now fully present. They breathed together, as if the music had synchronized their hearts for a brief, perfect moment. Her playing was not just skillful, it was compassionate. Each note seemed to understand the room, the people in it, and the emotions that were floating beneath the surface. The young couple felt closer, their hands intertwined, and a sense of quiet understanding passed between them. The barista, usually moving quickly, found himself pausing, taking the time to enjoy the simple beauty surrounding him. The child giggled softly again, pressing a tiny hand to their lips in delight. Even those who had been alone in the cafe, absorbed in work or thoughts, felt included. A man with a laptop closed it gently, realizing he had been missing this simple human connection. A woman reading a newspaper set it down, sensing the gentle power of the music. The cafe had become more than a cafe. It had become a shared space of humanity, quiet emotion, and subtle wonder. The young woman continued, her hands gliding across the keys, creating patterns that felt natural, flowing, and deeply human. Each passage told a story without words, and each note carried an emotional weight that was felt rather than analyzed. Patrons were not passive listeners. They were participants in a shared moment, united by the invisible thread of the music. As the melody shifted, people noticed small, personal reactions in themselves. A sigh escaped softly from someone who had been holding tension in their shoulders. A small smile formed on the lips of another, accompanied by a sense of peace. A child tilted their head, trying to understand the feeling that came from sound alone. The cafe, ordinary in its appearance, had become extraordinary in the emotions it evoked. The young woman's eyes lifted briefly, noticing the quiet faces turned toward her. She did not smile openly, but there was a warmth in her gaze, a subtle acknowledgement of the connection she had created. The cafe had fallen into a rhythm guided by her hands, and everyone in the room was attuned to it. There was no need for words. The music spoke in place of conversation, in place of explanation, in place of distraction. As she moved to the final chords, the room seemed to hold its breath again. Each note lingered slightly longer, resonating with a softness that made it feel almost tangible. Patrons felt a sense of completion, a gentle closure to a shared emotional journey. Even as the sound faded, the energy of connection remained, leaving a quiet hum of warmth and shared experience. The child clapped quietly, bringing a smile to those around them. The couple exchanged a gentle look, feeling gratitude for having witnessed something unexpectedly beautiful. The barista returned to his work, but there was a noticeable lightness in his step. Patrons who had been strangers moments before now felt an unspoken bond, an understanding that they had shared something rare and meaningful. In that moment, the cafe was no longer just a cafe. It had become a place where ordinary people experienced the extraordinary together. The young woman at the piano had transformed a simple morning into a memory that would linger long after the final note faded. Her music, gentle yet powerful, had connected hearts, stirred emotions, and reminded everyone present of the beauty in shared human moments. As she finally lifted her hands from the keys, the cafe remained quiet for a heartbeat longer. Then, slowly, people began to exhale, some whispering softly to one another, some smiling in quiet satisfaction. The young woman packed her case gently, her calm presence still filling the room even as she prepared to leave. Patrons lingered, savoring the magic that had unfolded, knowing that they had been part of something rare, gentle, and deeply human. The young woman's hands lingered on the final notes, the sound fading softly into the warm air of the cafe. For a long moment, the room held its breath, as if afraid to break the spell that had settled over every table and every person. Patrons remained still, their eyes closed or gazing at the piano, letting the silence carry the weight of the music that had passed through the room. It was a silence full of feeling, rich and profound, almost like the room itself had paused to remember. Slowly, people began to exhale, a quiet, collective release of breath that seemed to ripple through the cafe. The child, who had been leaning on the table, giggled softly, breaking the stillness with innocent delight. The couple by the window smiled at each other, their hands still intertwined, a subtle warmth passing between them. A few patrons who had been holding back tears quietly wiped their eyes, feeling gratitude for the unexpected beauty they had just witnessed. Even the barista, standing behind the counter, allowed a small, contented sigh to escape, a smile tugging at his lips. The young woman closed her piano case with careful, deliberate movements. Her calm presence remained as she stood, offering a small, polite nod to the patrons who looked at her with quiet admiration. There was no flourish, no dramatic gesture, just a gentle acknowledgement of the connection she had created. People returned the gesture, some nodding slightly, some smiling, and some simply staring, still caught in the memory of the music. The cafe, which had been transformed into a place of quiet reflection and shared human emotion, began to return to its usual rhythm. Conversation resumed, softly at first, hesitant and reverent, then gradually becoming more normal. People spoke in lower tones, careful not to disturb the lingering sense of calm. Laughter returned, gentle and warm, blending with the soft sounds of cups and spoons. The energy in the room was different, though slightly lighter, more connected, and filled with an unspoken understanding of the moment they had shared. Patrons glanced around at each other, exchanging quiet looks of acknowledgement. Strangers who had once been lost in their own thoughts now shared a subtle bond, a memory that connected them for a brief, precious time. The child skipped slightly, tapping a foot to an imaginary rhythm, as if trying to hold onto the feeling that had filled the room. The couple by the window whispered softly, reliving the gentle rise and fall of the melody in their minds, their connection deepened by the shared experience. The barista moved with a calm efficiency, filling cups and serving pastries, but there was a noticeable difference in the air. Patrons seemed more present, attentive and appreciative of the little details. The warmth of their coffee, the softness of the sunlight, the smell of freshly baked bread. Even those who had been in a hurry paused, taking an extra moment to notice the small, ordinary joys around them. The music had left an imprint, subtle yet powerful, a reminder of the beauty in simple, human moments. A woman who had been quietly reading set her book aside, glancing at the piano with a soft smile. She felt a gentle emotion she could not entirely name, but it warmed her heart and softened her thoughts. A young man who had been typing on his laptop closed it carefully, realizing he had been too caught up in tasks to notice the present. He took a deep breath, letting the memory of the music linger and fill a small empty space inside him. The young woman slipped out of the cafe quietly, her presence leaving a sense of completion and peace. She did not rush and she did not look back. Her departure was as gentle as her music, leaving the room intact yet subtly transformed. Patrons turned back to their conversations, some sharing experiences of the music, some simply savoring the feeling in silence. The cafe continued to buzz softly with life, but it carried a new depth, a shared memory that would linger long after the morning had ended. A few people left the cafe, walking out into the street with a soft smile, still hearing the notes in their minds. The warmth of the morning sun felt brighter, the air seemed lighter, and the simple act of being alive was more vivid. Even those who had come with worries or burdens felt a little lighter, as if the music had carried away some of their tension, leaving room for reflection and gentle joy. Patrons who remained glanced around at the room, noticing subtle changes. Chairs were still slightly shifted from attentive leaning, cups held more gently, and faces carried the quiet glow of shared experience. The café, once ordinary, now held a memory that everyone present would carry with them. A morning that had begun like any other, but had turned into something special, human, and unforgettable. The barista wiped down a table, smiling to himself as he noticed the small gestures of appreciation. A nod, a soft word of thanks, a quiet smile. He knew that this day would be remembered not for the usual business or routine, but for the small miracle that had unfolded in the corner by the piano. The music had reminded everyone, even briefly, of the simple joys and quiet connections that made life meaningful. People gradually returned to their activities, some reading, some sipping coffee, and some chatting softly. But the energy had shifted. The ordinary had become extraordinary, and the memory of the music lingered in the air like a gentle fragrance. Patrons noticed small details they had overlooked before. The way sunlight fell across the table, the warmth of a friend's hand, the sound of the world outside the window blending with the quiet hum of the café. The young couple lingered, reluctant to leave, savoring the memory of the notes and the emotions they had stirred. The child, now distracted by a small toy, looked back at the piano occasionally, as if remembering the magical sound that had captured their attention. The older man, who had been alone with a book, took a deep breath and smiled softly, feeling a sense of connection he had not anticipated. The café, full of ordinary people, had become a place of shared humanity. Even as the morning passed and new patrons arrived, there was a lingering sense of calm, a quiet awareness that something remarkable had occurred. The story of the young woman and her piano would live on in the memories of everyone present, a gentle reminder that beauty, connection, and wonder could appear in the simplest places. The café had returned to its usual rhythm, but it carried a subtle magic, an imprint of the music that had transformed an ordinary day into a lasting experience. As the day continued, patrons spoke quietly about what had happened, sharing impressions and emotions. Some spoke softly to friends, others reflected silently, but all carried the trace of the music with them. The young woman's presence had left a mark, not through grandeur or spectacle, but through the simple, human power of a melody played with care, emotion, and attention. The café, and everyone within it, had been touched by something rare, a moment of connection that was felt rather than explained. Even as the sun climbed higher and the café filled with new faces, there was an understanding among those who had been there earlier. They had witnessed a quiet miracle. Patrons remembered how a single person, with a small piano and simple notes, had held their attention, stirred their emotions, and created a moment of shared humanity. It was a story they would carry with them, silently, in their hearts, a reminder that beauty could appear unexpectedly, changing an ordinary day into something memorable. By the time the café reached its usual mid-morning rhythm, the music had faded completely, but its echo remained. Patrons continued with their lives, but their minds and hearts carried a subtle, enduring warmth. Conversations, laughter, and movement resumed, but now tinged with a sense of reflection and appreciation. The young woman had entered quietly, played softly, and left just as quietly, yet she had left an indelible mark on the people who had experienced her music. It was a day that began like any other, with coffee, pastries, chatter, and routine, yet it ended with something more profound, a reminder of the extraordinary in the ordinary, the beauty of quiet moments, and the human connections that could be formed through simple acts of creativity and care. Patrons left the café carrying a memory that would linger, feeling lighter, more present, and more connected to the world around them. In the quiet aftermath, the café itself seemed to hold its breath for a moment, as if remembering the music. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the tables and the remnants of breakfast, casting gentle shadows. The air carried the faint aroma of coffee and pastry, but also something more intangible, a sense of shared experience, of connection, and of beauty that had touched everyone who had been there that morning. The young woman's presence and music became part of the cafe's story, a memory whispered in the minds of those who had been there. Patrons spoke of it quietly, laughed softly, or simply remembered it in silence. Her gift had been simple yet profound, human yet extraordinary, leaving behind a lasting impression that would remain long after the final note had faded. And so, the cafe returned to its daily rhythm, carrying with it the quiet magic of a morning that had been transformed by one person, a piano, and the power of music that touched the heart of every listener.